Welcome to Cecak Audio Podcast, a presentation of Cecak Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths crossed his. And anything else that comes to mind. My name is David Chadwick, and I'm the Poobah of Cecak Archives. I'm speaking to you from Sanur with Doggett Bandita and Feline Cuchita at my side. Dear Katrinka is in America, and no plane's gonna land here with her for a while. So I appreciate your being here to keep me company in my self-isolation. Before we go any further, I must thank our sponsor. This program is brought to you through the generous support of you, our dear listeners. We are most grateful. Thank you. May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. At 2 minutes into Podcast 6, it's time for the Table of Contents, which will be immediately followed by an indefinite amount of meditation, followed at 8 minutes and 55 seconds by Life in Bali, or in this case, Life and Death in Bali. At exactly 17 minutes, we'll have Dear Dave, letters from the listeners. At 30 minutes and 40 seconds, Peter Schneider, founding teacher of Beginner's Mind Zen Center in Northridge, Los Angeles, returns with a brief story that spans decades. At 42 minutes and 40 seconds, there are comments on Crooked Cucumber, Chapter 2, concluding at 1 hour, 41 minutes, and 52 seconds, with a conversation with Master Translator Fred Harriman. So before we get going any further here, let's practice a little meditation together. So, on the sound of the bell, just hit pause on whatever device you're listening to this on. Meditate for as long as you wish, and then hit pause again, or whatever you do, to get the audio going again. And you will return at the exact same time that I do and that everybody else does. And you'll know because the bell to end meditation will hit right after you come back. I'm being a little distracted here. This very nice little chechak is crawling around on the wall. There's a light on here, and so there's bugs around, and it is just having a great time. Chechaks are little lizards. They're like, maybe they're a type of gecko, that they're small. And it's right next to me. It's like 2 feet away on the wall. So cute. And oh, there's a little one. I mean a smaller one. Little tiny, like, half an inch long. We have gecko, too. You know when you have gecko, because they make a lot of noise. Boy, and when they get big, I mean, they really make noise. It's It is frightening and deafening, some of them. I have slept right under gecko before. Like, to be waking up, it's like something out of a horror movie. I'll see if I can get a good recording of one and throw it on. But the chechaks are really cute. They do make little tiny noises sometimes. Ooh, I just saw him eat a buggy. Oh, he's having a great time. The thing that's so cool is he's not afraid of me at all. They always just dart out of sight. They're all over. They spend a lot of time behind pictures and the stove and the refrigerator and, wherever they're not in plain view, but that doesn't stop them from... I'll go into the kitchen and, they'll scurry. I'll see one or two or three, scurrying back out of sight. And what I really don't like is when I turn the toaster on and one leaps out. They're part of living here, and people like them and accept them. And they're in the house, and they're on the walls. They crawl on the ceiling. It always amazes me, think that there is something that can crawl across the ceiling. And they do it very easily. And they're so cute. And they're good luck. We love them. Oh, so now, I'm sorry. Now's the bell for meditation. Hit pause. When you come back, there'll be a bell to end meditation. Or zazen, or vipassana, or whatever you do. You can chant. You can do running. If running is your meditation, you can do it. In fact, you can like driving is I always found driving to be meditation, and you might want to drive and have driving meditation. Steve Stuckey, the wonderful late abbot of Zen Center, taught Zen driving. And it was fantastic. I'd see him, with a line of cars following him. Okay, here we go. Hit pause after the bell. Well, that was good. And I really like meditating with others. I like the feeling better than just meditating alone. I almost always just meditate alone or sit zazen. But doing it with others is really good. So thank you. I pray that you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. Here in Bali, well, the count now for number of positive people here is 235 with 4 deaths. And again, these numbers are growing very slowly. And the numbers in Indonesia, 10,000 positive, 10,108, 792 deaths. You know how they're counting this? Last week we talked about how, with Sarah Warmold, how a lot of deaths just aren't reported. These are people who have died in the hospital and been tested. Now, they don't have a lot of testing here. A lot of people die outside of hospitals here. A higher percentage here, for sure, than in the United States. To me, the most reliable numbers are excess deaths compared to the same time last year. And I would imagine even that would be underreported here because of the way things are reported. With the less sophisticated people, the more country people, the kampung, the deeper you go, the less likely they are to come out and go to hospitals or to bring their older relatives. Older people here are sort of written off, and they're written off at an age that a lot of us think of as still middle age. There were some eye doctors here from Europe, and I've seen this in India too. A group of doctors will come, and there's certain types of eye diseases and blindness that are very easy for them to take care of. And they go around and find these and help these people. It's been done in North Korea, too. You know, it's like a miracle to people. All of a sudden, people can see and stuff. Well, they said the problem they had here was getting people to bring their older relatives because they just sort of said, well, you know, they're older and they're going to check out pretty soon anyway. And so they had to, like, aggressively go into villages and find them because of the attitude of the younger people. I've had people say to me, you know, how old are you? And I'd say, well, right now I'm 75. They'd say, oh, my God. Well, my father's like 58, and he looks older than you. And I have noticed people tend to age more here. Maybe it's because it's the tropics. I would think more likely it's nutrition. Poor nutrition, according to an article I read, maybe in BBC Science, is the leading cause of death in the world. But I know what the main cause of death is. There's no doubt about it. That's birth. And I remember when I was here in 92, noticing that there was a lower percentage of the population tended to be old people. And I probably noticed that because I just lived for 4 years in Japan, which I think has maybe the highest percentage of older people of any country in the world. Here, I'm going to check on that. All right, I did. Japan is after Monaco, which was very high. Monaco's median age was like 54. Japan's was like 47, followed by Germany at 46. And United States was way down there at 38. And Indonesia was 30. So there's fewer old people. They say there's a higher percentage of asymptomatic people because the median age is so low. And, you know, median age means half the people are over that and half the people are under it. I just read a report that said a health team here went into a remote village where some people were sick and checked everybody and found 400 people. I think they were positive. They used another word like reactive or something. Oh, I know. They didn't want to call them positive yet until they did another type of test on all of them, the swab test. And I read an Al Jazeera article today that talked about how the low cases in Bali specifically had stumped the epidemiologist who thought there would just be tons here. They thought it'd be an epicenter because of all the Chinese that come here and that came here in March. But one thing that just occurred to me today is that possibly the way that almost all Chinese tourists here stick together means they had minimal contact with locals. After spending tons of money promoting Bali and Indonesia as a tourist destination for Chinese, they now wish they'd spent it on Europeans and Americans who spend more money and share more money with the local economies. They've already got the neighboring Aussies who've been coming here for decades. They're not happy with Chinese tourists here because they use their own companies so much, buses, hotels, restaurants. They don't mingle much. So less transmission, I'd assume. Now, there are various explanations on why the numbers here are so low, like the low median age and the number of asymptomatic people being more. However, that doesn't explain the fact that there's not more cremations. There's not more graves being dug. The hospitals aren't unusually busy, but that would be somewhat because people are afraid to go there. So it really is a mystery. And the head of the big Hindu organization in Indonesia said it's good karma and the result of prayers and good nutrition. He said good nutrition and herbs in the food. You've got to wear a mask if you go out here, no matter how far you are from others, even riding a motor scooter. There was a photo on the Sanur community Facebook page of some Pechalang, the neighborhood monitors, who'd stopped a local guy without a mask and were making him do push-ups for punishment. And the beaches are closed again. God, it seems so pointless. There were so few of us there, so far apart. Must be some groups are abusing it, like, what I hear is surfers or people going there for ceremonies. Darn, I don't think it will last, so we'll just grin and bear it. Now it's time for Dear Dave. Judith in Germany writes, Dear Dave, did Suzuki Roshi use a translator? Well, first I'd like to say that I'm not Dave, I'm David. And I really don't like being called Dave. I don't know why, I've never liked it. And people do it. But, all right, next time. So did Suzuki Roshi use a translator? No, never. Maybe unless he was speaking to somebody who didn't speak English or Japanese. No, he started speaking English to English speakers as soon as he arrived in America. Now, he might have had some help from Kazumitsu Kato right at first, the priest who'd been helping out at Sokochi while he was going to school in UC Berkeley. But no, he never did use a translator. He did give talks in Japanese to the Japanese congregation, and I have run into people who said, yeah, I went to hear Suzuki Roshi speak, or probably wouldn't have said it if it was back then. They'd probably say, Reverend Suzuki speak. But it was all in Japanese, He was really beautiful. I enjoyed the vibes, but I didn't, I didn't understand anything. Well, they went into one of his Sunday lectures to the Japanese congregation. All right, there's one more letter here. Steve from Kansas writes, Dear Dave, Bali's tropical, right? How many showers do you take a day? And can I call in during a show? Well, Steve, first I'd like to say that I'm not Dave, I'm David. But anyway, well, I take different numbers of showers on different days. I like to take a cold shower. I don't even turn the hot water on most of the time. I like to take a cold shower when I get up. It is nice to have warm showers here. I just like the cold shower to, help wake me up. And also, I'll sleep in a T-shirt and underwear, and I put them in the laundry, take a cold shower, and then get dressed for the day, which is another t-shirt and underwear and swimsuit. I wear almost nothing but that. And the swimsuits I wear are almost like Bermuda shorts. Yeah, but that's because I'm mainly home or walking down to the beach or taking a walk in the neighborhood with Bondi. But if I'm going shopping or to visit someone or something, which I don't go visit anyone now, but if I am, then I'll wear nice shorts and a nice shirt. If I'm going to the immigration office or some nice event or something, I wear pants and a nice shirt. I don't have any shoes, but I have Birkenstocks. And if it's really fancy, I can put on Birkenstocks with socks. I did have I have tennis shoes. I had one pair of slippers that looked like shoes, but Mudik, our plumber and electrician, was here doing something, and he said he was going home to Java for some Muslim holiday, and asked me if I had any extra shoes. And I just couldn't believe it. This guy is a really, really good plumber and electrician, and he's done villas and stuff. And really, the pay for skilled workers here is so low, it's just shocking. So I gave him that one pair of shoes. He was very, very happy with it. My gosh. Then I almost always take a shower before I go to sleep at night. And there can be showers during the day. You know, if I go out and walk and it's hot and I come back and my T-shirt's wet or anything like that, I'll take a shower. Well, I'd say that 2 is the norm, but 3, I probably take 2.5 showers a day. But there's another thing I do, and that Katrinka and I do, is we take baths. And they don't use bathtubs, they use showers. And in India, they use showers. Now, here there'll be bathtubs in places for foreigners. And sometimes they build these big ones. They're trying to, do like a big hot tub type thing, but they'll be too big. They don't have enough hot water to go, even if it's on demand, it'd take forever. You don't want to do that. And we've been 2.5 years in this house, maybe a little more, maybe 2 years and 7 months or something, or 8 months. I bet it's 8 months now. A little over a year ago in January, Katrinka was in America. I splurged and had Cardino, our carpenter, fix-it man. He'll do anything. If he'll clean the house if the house cleaner isn't here. He's a really neat old guy, man. He'll ride up on a bicycle. He'll come 15 kilometers on a bicycle. And he'll go out and get lumber and carry it on his bicycle. But he'll ride in on he doesn't drive a motor scooter. He'll come in with his son on a motor scooter, son Perry. They're from Java. He's a great guy. I just like him so much. They're Muslim. I deal with a lot of Muslims, and I really like all the Muslims I know and deal with. They're really, really nice people. I was talking to him one time. I said, hey, look, I got this 3-color string on my wrist because I went to this ceremony in the Hindu temple yesterday. And I said, I really like to have that because people are looking at it and they go, oh, are you Balinese? And I like to participate in the Hindu ceremonies. To a small extent here. Go get purified and get water poured on your head, and at the local temple, and mangrove water, and usually go in and immerse in it. And it looks a little questionable, but it's all right. I said, actually, I'll participate in any sort of religious thing that's going on, as long as doesn't go on forever, and if it's just doing something with other people, or if you can meditate when you're doing it. I said if I was in Java and it was okay, I'd go to a mosque and do what they were doing because it's not intellectual, it's just some sort of prayer. I said, and really, I don't think about it, and I don't even think about Buddhism when I meditate or any of that. And he said, God doesn't care. That was so great. I brought him in and I said, listen, we want to build a bathtub here. We want it to be like Japanese bathtubs, one where you sit upright, but a little bigger than the average one, but not too big. And he brought other people in. He brought a tile guy in and a plumber in. And so we have this incredible tile bathtub, and it's got a little tile bench in it. And you get in there, and I can sit cross-legged in it and sit up. And had to get its own on-demand heater. I love it. That's one thing, the first year we were here, I said, gee, every now and then I'd say it would be perfect here if we only had a bathtub. I just love. And I learned at Tassajara from the first person that told me this, Bob Beck, the guy that sold it to us, is that the way to cool off in hot weather is to take a hot bath. That makes your body cool off. If you go in cold water, it makes your body heat up. So it doesn't matter if it's hot, if it's cool. It never gets cold here. Hardly ever gets to where it's beyond short sleeves. Really love our hot tub. And I want to say one thing about it. I was taking a bath, and instantly I had a foam cover for it. So I can take a bath, and if she's out at meetings and doing things and going to be coming back later at night, I can cover it like a hot tub cover. I can cover it. It'll be hot. She doesn't like it as hot as I do. So it'll be perfect for her when she gets back. Another thing I did the other day was I took a hot bath at night, and then I went in the next morning. It was cold, and just instead of a shower, I just dunked myself in there. But one thing she did not long ago, she's been gone. She's been gone for 6 weeks. No, and she's been gone 7 weeks. But say a few months ago, I was taking one. She turned the light off and lit a candle. That was so cool. Now I almost always do that, and then I started oming, and it's a small room. And it's got this great acoustics, and I'll make up different types of ohms. And Bondi will come in and put her paws up on it and look at me, and I'll be going, hey, I'll tell you what, I'll record it and share it with you. Okay. So the other, Steve wanted to know, can he call in during a show? Yeah, that wouldn't work out very well. I think that would take some sort of, warp in the space-time vortex to make that work. But, maybe we can swing that in the future when we get more technologically savvy. I was doing a radio interview when I was going around doing readings for Crooked Cucumber back in 99. And in Santa Fe, I was staying with Maggie Grass, an old Zen student who has passed on to the next Bardo. Dear Maggie. She always had other people staying there or taking care of them. And she had this guy. They were frequently sort of interesting individuals. She had this guy there who would, like playing a guitar, and he'd made a tape, and he'd say, hey, you want to buy one of my tapes? So I bought a tape of his for $10. So anyway, I was in this radio station, just a local Santa Fe station. So, they asked me about the book and blah, blah. And then he said, okay, now we'll have a call-in. And so, we sat there and nobody called. And finally the phone rang. And the guy got on the line and he said, hey, David, I'm so-and-so staying at Maggie's house. And then he said, "Have you listened to my tape yet?" That was so great. I said, I haven't had time yet, but I will. He said, "Yeah, it's really pretty good. And can I tell people there about it?" I said, "Well, I think you should come have your own interview here because we have to move on now." He went, "Okay, well, thanks a lot. See you later." Last week, we were honored to have Peter Schneider as our guest. Peter, who, along with his wife Jane, are the teachers at the Beginner's Minds Indo in Northridge, Los Angeles. And he told about coming to Zen Center and how that all worked out, and that was all neat. And he told another story that I didn't include last week. And this one is about how Paul Shippey came to Zen Center and how Peter was involved in that decision of Paul's in an unusual way. To set the scene here, Peter starts talking about the writer for the Village Voice that he was hanging out with, the one who had helped him put up posters to announce the talk that Peter arranged for Suzuki to give.
So that the editor friend, he'd taken someone's place. The guy that I put up the signs with, Village Voice guy, the person that he took the place of, had gone out to Big Sur to write the great American novel.
Jack Goddard.
Okay, so there you go, Jack Goddard. He came to Tassajara to write an article about Tassajara.
Right.
So I took him around Tassajara for a day, and they took some pictures, and then he went away, and that was that. And then I can't remember the timing on this, but several months later, he sent me his article, and I was on the front page, the middle of the front page of the Village Voice. With a picture of me, right? I mean,
yeah.
I had become Mr. Tassajara for a day, okay?
Uh-huh. Oh, that's cool. I've got that article on Cuke.com, incidentally.
Oh, you do? Oh, you really? Oh, my goodness. Now, fast forward 30 years. And I'm going to see Dick and Dan before the ordination ceremony, and for a couple days, when Dan became the head of the temple.
Oh, you mean at Crestone?
At Crestone, yeah.
Yeah.
So I was at Crestone, okay? And Paul lives there, Paul Shippey.
Yeah, he lives there. He lives in Crestone. You can walk there from his house.
So we were with him that day, and he said, I never told you this, Peter. He said, but one time I was living in New York, and of course Paul and I had lived together in the same house in the Haight area. It was in San Francisco. We all shared a house, and I had money back from taxes, so I was paying for the house. There were 5 of us lived in an apartment in a flat, not a house. Anyway, but I lived with Paul for several months, and Paul and I, one day, Paul said to me, let's take a freight. It was like 10 o'clock at night, and we were just in the summertime. He said, let's go to Seattle. I said, why not? And then we went to Seattle on a freight train. Hopped a freight and took a freight from, there's a place, you don't go from San Francisco, you got to go from San Francisco to someplace in the East Bay, and then you get a train that goes up.
Yeah,
I did that. And anyway, so there we are in Crestone. He said, I was walking in the village, he said, and I went by a newsstand. No, this is back in 1967 or so, okay? Paul was living in New York City. He was walking in the village, and he looked down, and he saw my picture on the Village Voice. And he said to himself, oh, my God, he said, if Peter can do it, I can do it too. And that's why Paul came to Tassajara.
Wow.
But he never told me that.
All right. Well, that's good. I appreciate that.
Okay, that's it, David.
All right. Well, Well, my love to you and Jane.
Okay, David.
Take care. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
So look what we have here. The article that was in the Village Voice on Tassajara by Jack Goddard. It's on Cuke.com because it was in one of the wind bells, and all the wind bells are on Cuke.com. You can just go to Cuke.com and write in the site search box, write Goddard, Goddard, our Village Voice article, or it'll come up. All right. One thing I'm reminded of looking at it is he visited Tassajara before the first practice period. He was there in the spring when we were just getting going. I really enjoyed knowing Jack. As we said, he was living in Big Sur, and he'd walk into Tassajara. Walking into Tassajara, though, is, you set aside a day for it. And now, I have known people that were really, really good hikers. And Jack was one of them who could, leave at sunrise and get there in the early afternoon. Not me. I'd leave in the morning and get to the other side at night and then have to find my way down. And Jack would tell me about going hiking way into the mountains. And he told me he had bleeding ulcers and that he could die if they acted up real bad when he was way off away. I don't know what happened to Jack. We lost touch. And if you're out there, Jack, here's a heads up to you. Thanks a lot. Zen Retreat in California, Not for the Frivolous, by J.R. Goddard, Village Voice, Thursday, July 6th, 1967. I'm not going to read the whole article. It's interesting. This is very normal for articles, because people are writing from memory and they project onto things. He's talking about people are working there and stopping erosion that for years undermined a nearby bridge. There's people working there. One is an elderly Japanese in plain white robes, his head smooth shaven. Now, Suzuki Roshi didn't wear white robes. If he was working, I guess he might have a gray robe or gray work clothes. They're like Japanese monks' work clothes. And he said the women were in the kitchen cooking. No, Ed was running the kitchen, Ed Brown. There were males and females in the kitchen. Maybe that day there were more females. Maybe it was a day off for Ed. I don't know. There were a few little things like that weren't quite right. But overall, it was a really good article. And Jack was a good guy, and we really liked him. I just want to go to what he said about, here we are. And now, in the part with the heading, Advance Guard. The Zenists took possession this spring. That's not true, Jack. We took possession right away in January. God, I went there first time in February, right after we got it. So he says, during the months since, the advance guard working and studying at Tassajara, we did mainly working, and we sat, had slowly swelled to well over 30. Oh, God, by the time the first practice period started, gosh, I think there was 80 people. There were really a lot of people, the most ever. Some people were there for a briefer time. Since it was something new, there was that first summer was unusual, and it was the only time we had a practice period in the summer. After that, they were in the fall and the spring. So come to know some of them, and you'll probably get a fair idea of the kind of people drawn to Zen anywhere in America. You'll also find... I'm tired, I can hardly see. You'll also find out more exactly what sitting in meditation, or zazen, really is. Peter Schneider, Tassajara's general manager, is one of the most articulate of the pioneering group. Oh, I see I can hit Control+ and make it bigger. An affable, good-looking man in his late 20s, he has several years of graduate school behind him, as well as desultory teaching of English and math. Throughout local Zendom, though, he is known as the man who sat zazen alone for 2 years, something of a solo flight record, considering one usually sits with others or with priestly guidance. Jack made too big a deal out of Peter having told him that he sat for 2 years by himself before coming to Zen Center. That's not unusual for people to come to Zen Center and say any number of things like that. But, it was all new to Jack, so we thought, wow. Now Jack has some quotes from Peter, and they're pretty neat. Hey, that's way back then, 67. That's 53 years ago. When you sit, your mind suspends for a while, he explains. Then things that have been pressing in on you start coming up. Something you've been worrying about, or even a rock and roll song banging inside your head. You realize how tightly wound up you are and how out of contact with yourself. Gradually, all this stuff empties out, he continues. You become aware of your breathing, then of your whole body. More gradually, you come into a kind of clarity of mind, like walking down a corridor of mirrors. Everything is beautifully reflected. At that stage, whatever transpires during your day is somehow more understandable, more ready to be dealt with. Well said, Peter. Crooked Cucumber, The Life and Zen Teaching of Shunryu Suzuki. Comments on Chapter 2. There was some errata in a prior podcast, and now no one would remember or care, but I'm going to point it out. So I was going over, when I was doing the comments, I think it was comments on Chapter 1. I was going through it, and I said, on page so-and-so, there's blah, blah, blah. And I kept referring to these page numbers while I was saying it. And then afterwards, I realized those aren't page numbers in the book. I have my own chapters that have evolved a little from what the book was. So that was just the page numbers for that file. My apologies for that, and I hope no one was confused or had a book we're trying to follow it and went, huh? I see they had fish for breakfast, Zonin, the young monks. I wouldn't have written that if I hadn't been told that. White rice, raw egg, miso soup, and fish. Japanese Buddhism in general is not strictly vegetarian. It depends on the lineage, the teacher, the sect. I'm not sure how it breaks down. Both temples I practiced and ate in Japan were strictly vegetarian. The Soto Fledgling International Temple Shogoji in Kyushu and the Rinzai Sogenji in Okayama. Mainly I ate at home there, but sometimes I'd eat with the monks. at Tassajara, we were strictly vegetarian. And, well, that's not true. We were lacto-ovo vegetarian. In other words, we had dairy products and eggs. But I've heard many stories of temples having meat, fish, and especially if it's donated by lay people. Lay people will donate meat and fish to the temple and they'll eat it, depending on the temple. Now, I shouldn't just say temples. I'm talking about practice temples with priests in training. With family temples like Suzuki's temple Rinso-in, they can do whatever they want. I don't remember eating meat in Rinso-in. Fish, yeah. But I just visit now and then for a day or two, so I don't really know. Here, where I live in Bali and in Indonesia, they hear you're a Buddhist, they immediately think you're a strict vegetarian. But that's not necessarily true even here either. It's just people think it. And there are, like in India, they think that for sure. And in India, there's vegetarian restaurants. They say, how do they say it? Veg and non-veg. So he had to start sitting cross-legged. He had to start sitting kekafuza, his full lotus. And or maybe hankafuza, half lotus. And it said he'd always sat Cecak, sitting on the shins. Cecak means correct sitting. And I've had to do a lot of that in America and in Japan, and it's pretty hard to do for a long time, and it can be very painful. But if you grew up doing it, you can do it a long time. One thing I think is interesting, I never heard anybody say, but since Son was adopted by Sogaku, then he was Toshi's stepbrother. So Toshi's teacher was his stepbrother, not just his father's Dharma heir. The word Soto Zen in Japan, what I normally ran into was people calling it Sodo Zen. Not the priests, not the Soto Zen people, but everywhere people said Soto Zen. And I learned just to call it Soto Zen when people asked me, when it came up in a conversation, if I wasn't talking to a monk, I would call it Soto Zen. And I might mention that, in the temple, we call it Soto Zen. They go, oh, how interesting. Suzuki talked about how the great master teacher Okasotan came to Zounin when he was a very young trainee. Gosh, I noticed that Suzuki says that Okasotan came with the disciple Kyugaku. That's in the transcript I'm looking at, and I've listened to it, whereas the book says the disciple Keiza. I'll have to look into that. But anyway, to him being there when Okasotan came, he clearly considered one of the greatest moments of his life. If we look at what he had to say about Okasotan here and there, though he didn't realize that fully till later, he said. Now, he said, at that time I saw a famous Zen master, Okasotan, and his disciple, Kyugaku, and those famous teachers were there. I was fortunate to see them, even though I didn't know they were so famous, but training was very strict. Okasotan Roshi did not become an archbishop, but under him we have many noted scholars and monks and Zen masters. He is maybe one of the most important people in our Soto history and Meiji period. And there are numberless powerful teachers appeared under him, so I think I was lucky to be there, and I was encouraged by them. Here that is, with his own voice, which I've edited some to streamline and cut out his frequent coughs, which if you want to hear, you can go listen to it in the archive. It's 69-09-16 Why I Came to America. That's the title. It's not the file name. The file name is 690916 with the dashes. And Oya on ShunryuSuzuki.com.
That time I saw a famous Zen master, Oka Sotan, and his disciple, Oka Kyukaku. And those famous teachers were there. I was fortunate to see them, even though I didn't know they were so famous. But training was very strict. Oka Sotan Roshi did not become an archbishop, but under him we have many noted scholars and monks and the masters. He is maybe one of the most important person in our Soto history in Meiji period. And there are numberless powerful teachers under him, appeared under him. So I think I was lucky to be there. And I was encouraged by them.
Now I'm going to read a little more of what Suzuki had to say about Oka Sotan. Oka Sotan Roshi was the source of power of all the Soto teachers that followed. Tatsugami Roshi studied under Harada Roshi, whose teacher was Oka Sotan. My teacher was Kishisawa Roshi, and my master was Suzuki Soon, and their teacher was Oka Sotan Roshi. Yoshimura Roshi's teacher is Hashimoto Roshi, Katagiri II. Hashimoto Roshi's teacher is Oka Sotan Roshi, you know. At Komazawa University, there was a good scholar of Buddhism, Eto Sogwo. He was my master's classmate when they were studying at Komazawa. At that time, Oka Sotan Roshi was head of Komazawa. Their understanding came from one source. He was a really great teacher. Not only was he a great teacher for his disciples, but also for lay people who studied under him. He was a great teacher. So things didn't happen at Zen Center just by chance. If we don't know what to do, if we study, Oka Roshi's teaching, Kishizawa Roshi's teaching, or Kurosawaki Roshi's teaching, the answer is there. Now you notice when Toshi gets ordained and takes the Buddhist name Shogaku Shunryu, I think Shogaku's an auspicious peak. From then on, we call him Shunryu. And it says he's a novice monk. Now, at Zen Center, when we got ordained first, we weren't called novice monks. We were called priests. We never used the word monk. Suzuki Roshi wasn't sure what was best to use in English. None of us were. And, priest wasn't really right. It was too exalted. But monk wasn't right. We weren't monks. I mean, at Zen Center, I used to say, the difference between the priests and the lay people here, the priests get married and have children, and the lay people are very strict and celibate. I mean, sometimes it's true, because a lot of them would be newer students or very serious students. when he sewed his, no, it doesn't say he sewed his okesa. We sewed our okeses. And his okesa, when he received robes, he got the kuromo. In addition to his kimono, he got the kuromo, which is like the Chinese robe, which has fuller sleeves and is black. Then to wear on the outside of that in formal occasions like zazen and ceremonies is the okesa, which is a big rectangle that's pulled over you and has straps that you tie in a certain way. It's constructed from much smaller rectangles, and it says resembling rice fields. Well, that's true. It's purposely resembling rice fields. That's the Chinese and the Japanese priest's version of the original monk's robe, which, as I recall, was also used as a tent. And it is a field, and it's made from scrap, not new material, preferably from clothes of the dead. And, it was cut up into pieces and dyed saffron, a cheery color. Japanese Zen robes are generally black. In Japan, white is the color of death. So black is good for them, but maybe not the best color for us, for Americans or Europeans. I remember one night sitting up with Robert Thurman as he went on about how wrong it is for Zen monks to have black robes in America and Europe. He's the well-known Buddhist scholar, founder of Tibet House in New York City, the first American the Dalai Lama ordained as a monk, I believe. Bob's a layman now, and he's translated for the Dalai Lama quite a bit. So we were drinking wine back then when I still did that, and he was so adamant that I promised him I'd make it one of the goals of my life to see that Zen monks in America did not wear black robes. He'd say, monks are supposed to be happy, not dour, serious, black-robed, blah, blah, blah. And I'd go, okay, I promise. And Bob also felt strongly about a lot of things and about politics, too. He felt strongly that the world needs to have monks meditating and practicing away from society in order to keep society, the whole world, in balance. He's quite an interesting and brilliant and highly articulate person. Oh, yeah. Here, Suzuki says, my own master said, I will not accept any monastery where there is lazy training, where the rooms are full of dust. He was very strict. I remember Claude Dallenberg, Ananda. He took the name Ananda later. He used to complain about overly fastidious cleaning that we eager young students would get into as the result of trying to emulate our idea of what Japanese cleaning and Japanese Zen was. And it was somewhat true. I mean, they're really, and I've spent time in Japanese temples, and the ideal is you clean everything every day. And Ananda said, well, I like the Chinese way. And I said, what's that? And he said, dust. No, I think he said dirt. Ananda, Claude Dallenberg, was one of the most senior Buddhists in America. He started with Alan Watts in Chicago in the late 1940s, and then followed Watts to San Francisco later and got involved with Sokochi and Suzuki and all. He was involved with a lot of Buddhists in town. Anyway, we'll hear more about him later. Now, in another Suzuki quote, he says, when we clean because of our vow, we will find that we are kind to everyone instead of angry. That is Bodhisattva's mind. Oops, I didn't get the whole thing. He says, then I felt some joy in cleaning the smut off the bands. In this way, each of us must have some vow. Then we will find joyful mind and big mind and kind mind. When he says joyful mind, big mind, and kind mind, he's referring to Dogen's instruction for the cook, the Tenzo Kyokan, where Dogen says those are the three minds the head cook in the temple must have. Oh, yeah, this thing where he talks about, the book talks about, and Suzuki Roshi talked about how they had to learn by doing, that someone wouldn't tell them anything, and not only would he not tell them how to do simple things like clean the pond, they just had to figure it out or watch him or something, and but he wouldn't tell them how to do ceremonies, and so they would, be nervous and awkward and being corrected during the ceremony and embarrassed. Well, Suzuki Roshi didn't go that far, but he was really short on teaching details and letting us figure things out, especially in Zazen. There were two styles in Zen Center. When somebody new would come, there was the style that I feel that Suzuki Roshi favored, was give them a minimum Zazen instruction, how we approach the cushion, bow toward it, bow away from it, sit on the cushion, turn around, bow, rock back and forth. And that was important to him. You put your hands on your knees and you rock back and forth and sit and get situated, and then just sit. You can say follow your breath or something. Focus on your hara, on your abdomen. But there are people whose tendency is to want to give long, detailed Zazen instructions at first. I remember at Tassajara when I was head monk, we had Zazen instruction every afternoon during the guest season. I would give very brief ones. They'd be about 5 minutes. You got to give them something. They expect something. People come, they're guests or they're new students. It's not going to work for us Americans to treat people coming in the sort of strict way that might be traditional in Japan. We should be friendly. Buddha sure wanted that. He wanted monks to look happy and friendly and colorful. So I'd give about a 5-minute Zazen instruction. But there were other people who gave 30, 40-minute Zazen instructions. And I didn't say anything. That's what they liked. I've heard Suzuki say it was good to come sit without any instruction and then get it later. Like if somebody come to him and say, well, I sat Zazen, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't have any instruction. He'd say, oh, that's the best way. I'd tell people to go sit a period before instruction if they do it. Frequently, though, maybe it was the norm for people to be intimidated by the formality of the Zendo and all the people in black robes, and they'd be worried that they were going to do something wrong and wanted the instruction as much to avoid embarrassment as anything. I'd tell them, don't worry, no one cares, and if you go too far off, someone will nudge you in the right direction, or maybe they'll ignore you, but don't worry. It doesn't matter. And if anyone does care, that doesn't matter. Buddha doesn't care. Suzuki Roshi would say there's nothing to teach. Of course, that's just one side of it. The other side is that there is something to teach. And you've got to have both sides, and he emphasized that too. Now, this thing about Zen being the way beyond words and letters, that's one side. But any lineage that stuck to that side and didn't have any reading or any teaching or anything, they disappeared. You've got to have both sides. This method of teaching without explaining everything up front, an extreme example of that is I've heard from those who've studied playing gamelan in Indonesia, specifically in Bali, although gamelan music is far more extensive than just Bali. It's Indonesian. There's this woman, Ibu Kat, K-A-T. Ibu means Mrs. or mother. And she's been writing weekly articles here for years and years. And she really knows the culture in depth. She lives near Ubud. Good Lord, she lives down near a river in a place she built, and she gets dengue all the time. And she writes about how to deal with that. She talked about studying gamelan. I met a woman in the Bali International Women's Association, a social service group that Katrinka's in, at an event they had. An older woman who had originally come here to study gamelan, and she had originally studied it at UCLA, and she corroborated the method of learning, and it's astounding. I mean, gamelan here in Bali, it's so fast. And they're hitting these bells with like two little strikers. You know, their two hands moving back and forth. They don't teach them anything. They just take a seat there and it starts and they have to follow. They have to follow somebody that's in the same part. But that's it. That's how they learn. There must be more to it than that. But both in what I read from Ibu Kat and what this woman told me was like that. And I think quite likely if we looked at cultures around the world, we would find that a great deal of teaching before the super intellectual civilizations evolved was like that. For your listening pleasure, here's some Bali gamelan. There's the quote from Suzuki in this chapter that says, "Sometimes it is better for your teacher to be mean so you don't attach to him." And then that's when it goes on to tell you that one by one all of his fellow students had left. Here's one story told about Son, but wasn't verified until the book came out. I knew it, but I wasn't sure if it was Suzuki or Katagiri, you know. But then Dennis Sampson mentioned it when I interviewed him. I did a lot of interviews after the book came out. I kept him still. I just wrote somebody today. Somebody got hold of me and said we were there together. And I wrote back and said, hey, write me something about it. And he was a top star right at the first. And he asked about Mike Daft. My goodness. And I said, I don't know where Mike Daft is either. I'd love to know. So Dennis mentioned this and confirmed that it was indeed something that happened to Suzuki. Shunryu was out working with his master, Gyokujun Son, on a bitterly cold winter day. They were cutting firewood. Suzuki's mind was wandering, and he didn't notice as Son pulled back the thin steel blade of his saw so that it was bent into a U shape. And then Son let it snap onto the unsuspecting face of poor little Crooked Cucumber. It was an extremely painful bit of shocking feedback that Suzuki would never forget. Moving on, a hard part of being alone with Son was that now Shunryu had to carry everything when they went places. So Suzuki Roshi talked about this. I remember that distinctly. He made a big point of it. And it wasn't just that it was something very difficult he had to do as a young monk. And I didn't make the point in the book that he made. I probably should have, but I didn't. Maybe I do later in the book. I haven't read it. He said he had to spend a lot of his time in his early training carrying heavy fruit back to the temple from ceremonies they'd done. He said they went out so much to do services in the homes of Danka, in the homes of lay people associated with the temple. And he urged us, his point in telling this was he urged us not to get into that. He urged us not to get in. And see, the Japanese Zen is generally thought of by people there as being a funeral and memorial service. And incense, in many people's minds, is associated with death. And I learned not to light incense in the home. Elin and I both had classes meet at our home. I remember one day we'd had some incense going somewhere, and my good adult class, somebody walked in and went, "Ugh, what's that smell?" And they distinctly didn't like smelling it. Well, it's the smell of death. So I learned not to do that. And my impression was people don't like Zen and don't like Buddhism. And I mean, they respect it. What they'll say is, they'll say, well, the priests these days, so many are corrupt and drink a lot and have parties. And the only real monks are the ones that are meditating up in the mountains with snow blowing in on them from open windows. And, they have this idea of harsh conditions and sitting with it as being real Zen. And there was a guy that, we lived next door to Sogenji where Shoto Harada Roshi taught. There was a guy who came there in the mornings early and poured cold water over his head. And Harada Roshi loved that. But Harada Roshi also had a very soft way, especially for a Rinzai teacher, and had many, many lay students. So Suzuki urged us not to do services for people who aren't part of the practicing Sangha. I would think he would extend that to people who aren't part of the Sangha, either as practitioners or supporters. I haven't seen it be a problem at Zen Center. I don't have a lot of guilty thoughts. I don't have a lot in my past that I regret. And sometimes I think about how much some of the little things I didn't do or that I did that bother me, how much they come back, and I think about them and I go, oh, darn, I wish I hadn't done that, or I wish I had done that. And I think, wow, I've met guys who in prison or who've done terrible, terrible things. I've talked to guys who were in Vietnam or in Iraq who've seen and done terrible things and read about it and everything. I think, oh my God, how would somebody live with that? And one of my regrets, actually a couple of my regrets that kept coming back, is because of I would get calls from people wanting me to do funerals and weddings. Dick Wertheimer was Zen Center's lawyer in the early days, and he did lots and lots for Zen Center. I don't know if he went back as far as getting it incorporated back in '62, but later incorporations, helping people with visas, stuff with getting Tassajara, whatever. He was a free lawyer for us, and he would come to Tassajara in the summers and I'd see him. And I'd talk to him some. I tried to interview him for Cricket Cucumber, but he didn't have much to say. He was just being funny. And he said we should do a book about sex. And I don't know, he'd talk about funny things. I got a call from someone in his family when he died asking if I'd do his funeral. I really don't want to do funerals. I didn't want to be a priest. I didn't want to do ceremonies. I have done a few for very, very close friends that forced me to, and I'm happy I did. Charles Fox and Bolinas, we were very, very close. And I did a wedding for him and Veronique, and it was very sweet. And but he had MS, and he lived so long with it, and he was such a wonderful guy. And I loved visiting him, and he asked me to do his funeral, and I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't do funerals. I said, and he'd asked me, I'd said, look, Charles, I'm visiting you while you're alive. I'm staying in touch with you. That's what's important. So the mistake I made and that I feel guilty about is not that I didn't do that funeral, but that I didn't follow up with the family and help them. I connected them with the Zen Center, and I didn't follow up or inform anybody, and nobody, well, at least the people who were dealing with him didn't know who he was. There was hardly anybody around at that time. That was decades after he'd done all that, who knew about the history. And the worst part is that later, Jordan Thorne told me he'd called them and talked about payment for the funeral. And they just didn't contact Zen Center again. Ouch. There was another person here that same time I have the same feelings about, and that's Roger Summers, who he and Elsa Gidlow were Alan Watts' landlords and owned the place up there in Druid Heights. And I loved Roger, and he was the most interesting, fascinating, wonderful jazz musician, architect. He did Neil Young's bus. Fascinating guy. I just loved him. I've seen Super Bowls with him. And they asked me to do his funeral, and same thing. And I don't know why I didn't follow up with either one of them. Sometimes I get in a bad place, or I don't know, or I'd be leaving town. I don't know why, but it bothers me in both those cases. But I can understand not wanting to do ceremonies outside of one's practice unnecessarily. But Dick Wertheimer and Roger Summers were not outside of our practice. My bad. One little thing I changed in what I read was that the name of the village below Rinsoin in Yaizu, I had Takakusa. That's the name of the mountain. I don't know why I used Takakusa for the name of the village below. Right now it's Sakamoto, and in the translation they changed that. They told me, they flagged every little change and told me. So I changed that to Sakamoto. I know that doesn't matter to you, but there's a lot of little things I'm not commenting on. One of the things I'm not commenting on, he said as he began to comment on it, is some writing changes. And, I find them very interesting, looking at particular words or phrases. And there's not a lot of it, just a little bit here and there. I think, no, I didn't say that quite right, or that isn't the quite right word. And one of them I thought about was when the boys went out and buried the rotting pickles, and they came back and they were proud that they'd gotten away with their prank, it said. And I thought, prank? I don't think that's really the right word. A prank is something you do to somebody. And that wasn't a prank. That was, what would you call it? Trying to get away from something there. I don't come up with words as quick now as I used to. But it takes me a little time. So before I could come up with that word, I was thinking, all right, I got to figure out what that word is. And now I have to Google and think about it. Whereas when I was younger, they just pop into my head. That's why younger people are better writers. That's one reason. So I just looked up the word prank, the definition. And it said a practical joke or mischievous act. And I thought, okay, it's good enough. It's a mischievous act. The word's good, because I always want to lead toward not making any changes, and making very few. The book mentions that Son didn't have his tabi on, his socks that are worn with zoris. There's two types. There's tabi, which have the indentation so the big toe and the other toes are different, and that can be worn with a zori. And then there's, I think it's called besu, which are used for even more formal ceremonies. And it has no indentation for the big toe. And when Tatsugami came to Tassajara and led 3 practice periods, I think he wanted it to have besu for one of them. I can't quite remember. But anyway, enough of that. So Mamushi, the boys had their tabi on. So the idea was, you run ahead, go ahead, and I'll be more careful. And they know there's mamushi. And mamushi are very, very small, but they're poisonous. And you can die from a mamushi bite. And so they run ahead, and then he scolds them for wearing their tabi when he's not wearing his, which is a typical teaching story in Japanese Zen. Mamushi, they have circles on them. The Japanese would say like it was like one of the copper coins, maybe 10 yen. That's how they described it. And they had that coin going down it. I'd hear about them growing in grass-thatched roofs, people having mamushi in their roofs. I don't know if you'd say growing in them. I've heard of them nesting in grass-thatched roofs. And I've talked to people who had mamushi in their roofs. Well, we were living in Okayama. I was looking out the back window one day from we had a library in back. We had a 9-room home. They were a very nice home with a garden right by some woods next to the temple. It was wonderful. And that's all thanks to Arata. He set us up with that, with a family who would only rent that home to somebody who he told them to rent to. Boy, did he take care of us. So I'm looking out the back window, and I had, I did little bits of fix-it stuff around the house, which incidentally, the neighbors would be astounded at, because people didn't do that. And I took a really nice piece of hardwood and had a local mill. There was a nearby mill, really small place, mill it the way I wanted, and had some other wood. And I built an entrance step, and Elin and I, the floors weren't insulated. There was like this really thin plywood, and below that was nothing. Not insulating homes was standard there. And we covered the area that didn't have tatami with some sort of linoleum or something. And we didn't insulate it, but it helped because there was air coming in between it. So we did that, and I built this step going up. And the man who owned the mill, he came over, and he looked at the work that I'd done in the entryway and went, "Oh, professional quality." So that was neat. So I had this wood out back, and I was looking at it, and by gosh, there was a mamushi on it. And so I didn't do anything. I would just come back, and it was there for several days. Eventually it wasn't there. I did check in to see if, like, maybe the university wanted it or something, or would take it, or if there was any city organization that would come pick them up or something, but I couldn't find anything, so I just left it alone. I heard of farmers cutting off a toe when they got a mamushi bite working in a field. Oh, that reminds me that when Taigen Dan Layton was visiting us in Japan over 30 years ago, he spent a year or so in Kyoto. We had to leave him on a Tuesday night when we went to a nearby town and taught classes all afternoon and into the evening at a culture center. We got back late at night, had to take a train and then a bus, and he said he'd been bitten by a mukade, a centipede, and they're big ones there. We have tiny ones in our house here in Bali, and they've never been a problem or a cause for worry. but they were a constant source of dread in Japan. I never got bitten, but I'd find them in the house, catch them with tongs, and let them go outside, and then watch them come at me when I let them go. They were frightening. Once when my mother and Kelly and my sister were visiting from the States, we were returning from a few days away. And when we got there, I ran ahead, leaving them for a moment with the bags, went inside straight to the bathroom, looked behind the towel hanging on a rack, and there was a nice long mukade, maybe about 5 inches. I came back out with it and put it in the bamboo grove next door. So Taigen had been bitten by one of them, and he didn't know anything about them or how poisonous they were. Ha, you Burschlamazel. And he told me that he'd considered cutting his toe off. He was right there in the kitchen when it happened, and the knives weren't far away. Good he didn't. Well, obviously. I've looked into that and read that there are no lethal centipedes on our blue orb. Oh, here's an interesting thing that I never thought about before, but at some point it says when they're at Rinsoin that Soen got new students. His lover Yoshi's, her nephews, started studying with him, and, people in the neighborhood, everybody respected him. And that it said Soen's nephew, Soko, became a student and became very close with Shunryu. So I went, wait a minute, his nephew? He's an adopted orphan. He's Shunryu's half-brother. What does that mean? Maybe it was Yoshi's nephew, but that's something I didn't deal with. He can't have a nephew. But it's something I don't understand. It's got to be a mistake somewhere along the line. Translation, transliteration, a misunderstanding, some mistake. I'm going to look into it. I have to. I'm trying to come up with a corrected transcript. The details aren't really important. What's important? What's important is waking up. What's important is practice and understanding the teaching. And the rest of this is all candy. But Suzuki Roshi said candy's the most important teaching. But listen, he said everything's... I have a whole section on Geek.com of all the times he said the most important thing is so-and-so. I have a whole list, not a section. I have a whole list, like 150 times he'd say, the most important thing is so-and-so. Because it all gets down to the same thing. Everything is just another way to dig into that core that's the same, no matter how you approach it, if that makes any sense to you. It says that Soen sent him to study with a Rinzai teacher and said, keep your beginner's mind, study their way, become a new student. Don't take, our trip here and impose it on that. So, and then Suzuki did talk about that. Well, of course he talked about it. That's where I got it from. But I heard about it elsewhere. I heard about it in Japan. Of course, one thing that Suzuki would do that I wish had been nailed down before, he'd say, my teacher or my friend did so-and-so. And I found the names of some of these people, and it doesn't matter, but it's sort of nice to know. But right here, I really would have liked to have known what Rinzai temple he went to and what teacher he was with. And one reason is that Dan Welsh was in Japan in the early 60s. He went over there when he was a teenager and studied at Soen Nakagawa's Ryutakuji, which is very near Rinsoin. He was there a year and a half as a young teenager. And he went to Yaizu, I think to visit Rinsoin to see Suzuki's temple. He had met Suzuki in America before he went. His teacher was Jack McDonough in Stockton, who sort of an obscure and controversial character. I met McDonough, who had questionable credentials. Another one of those characters in early American Buddhism. So anyway, Dan was going to San Francisco once, and McDonough told him, hey, there's a new priest over at Sokoji in San Francisco, and you should drop by and say hello. So very early, early 60s. Dan went over to Sokoji and met Suzuki and said hello and this and that and delivered McDonough's greetings. And Suzuki did go to meet McDonough with Kazumitsu Kato, a priest who helped him in the early days. But we get into that later in the book. And that's humorous. So I don't remember. And incidentally, Dan's Japanese got very good there. He got a lot better in a year and a half than mine did of 4 years. Which naturally, he was living, there was no English where he was living. That's the way to learn. So he said that he was talking to an old guy in Yaizu, and they talked about Suzuki. And the guy told him that Suzuki had studied with the great Genpo Yamamoto. Well, Genpo Yamamoto was the most famous Rinzai Zen teacher of the time, I think, or one of the most. And he was Soen Nakagawa's teacher at Ryutakuji, and also knew the emperor and was influential in trying to get the emperor to cool it on the war. And I can't remember the details on that, but he was involved in the movement to try to nudge Japan out of destroying itself at the end. That is very interesting to me, that might have been Genpo and that Suzuki was with with his fellow students at Ryutakuji. However, all we can say now is that maybe that was it. We don't know. As the book said, his experience there left him with an unsatisfied feeling about going practice because he felt he got past just to be nice. All practice is unsatisfying. And Suzuki said, Buddha is never satisfied. See, that's one side, right? That's not the side of Buddha we normally think about. So, what was it we called? Daikoku-sama. Yoshi was the Daikoku-sama of Rinsoen, and Daikoku was one of the gods. It says that it was the only god who didn't go to Izumo in October. Izumo is the mother shrine in Japan. In October of their old calendar, the lunar calendar, there's a festival there every year where the gods go to Izumo, the grand shrine. People say that the gods go there to talk about the upcoming deaths and births and important events in people's lives. That's a big deal there, that sort of thing. Japan seemed to me to be just as much animistic as Buddhist. What people really like is Shinto. That's what I experienced. And what they really felt close to was Shinto. Because Shinto dealt with life and with birth. That's where you take your babies when they're born. If they die, you take them to the Buddhist temple. I mean, you go there to deal with it. That's where you get married. Not always, but usually. New Year's Day to the Shinto shrine. Buddhists got New Year's Eve ringing the big deep bells 108 times. It says in the Edo era. Now, I was looking back, and I used the word Tokugawa. It was the Tokugawa shogunate, but it was in the Edo era. So that's one thing I'd look at in the book is, did I use those words well and make them clear? At the point that Shunryu goes back to Shoganji to be with his parents, it says, in 1919, when Shunryu was 15, Sogak and Yone killed the Dio with Son and took their son back to Shoganji from Rinsoin. So why did I use that phrase, killed the Dio? Because that's what the translation said, and I liked it. I would not have come up with that. I wouldn't have used that phrase. A lot of the wording in this book is coming straight out of translations or straight out of what people said who I talked to. I made up very, very little. And I noticed sometimes people would say I made things up or this or that. People say things. There was one woman who was working for the New York Times who was involved with the Shambhala group who claimed that I'd made up what people said in interviews. I'd put words in their mouths and this and that, and she could tell because it sounded so much alike. I would just cut and paste stuff out of interviews and put it in there. I would stick as close as I could to what people said. Mainly, I don't like to be involved with teaching. I like to share what I've heard and what I've learned and help people share with each other. At one point, Shunryu talks about slipping into hell. So this is where he's talking about when we were little boys, we were all innocent Buddhas, and the danger of innocence and becoming attached to purity. As long as we have beginner's mind, we have Buddhism. If we know our unchanging original nature, we can believe in the innocence of beginner's mind. At the same time, we should beware of slipping into hell through attachment to this or any idea. Now, the idea of hell that is so prevalent in Western countries and out of the Judeo-Christian tradition is an old pagan idea that's not really, as far as I'm concerned, part of the essential teaching of Christianity, or Judaism is not into hell at all. Frederick String, who wrote the book Emptiness, who was a Methodist minister who taught at Southern Methodist University, and I was very close with him, very sad when he died so young. Fred String told me that. He said that sort of idea of hell is really not supported by the Bible or the teachings of Jesus. But hell does have a meaning. I mean, hell is the lowest states of mind, and it's not a place, but it's very real. We do not want to sink into the lowest states of mind. It's unimaginably horrible. I have been in very, very low states of mind, and it's beyond the sort of descriptions that I've seen coming from, like in Dante or this or that. There's no one thing. It has infinite varieties, but it's nothing you stay in. I think that the term eternal hell, though, does have some meaning. I think you could say as you get into higher states and lower states, it has more of an eternal feeling, like this is all there is. This is the way it always was. It's the way it always will be. Like when one is in terrible pain or falls gaga in love, it can be like time is stopped or warped. So we do want to avoid going into lower states. And in Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, there was the practice of the small person, the middle-sized person, or something like that, and the big or great person. The lowest of those practices, which was still a Buddhist practice and an accepted practice, was not to be reborn into hell. In other words, not to sink into the very lowest states of mind. That is an acceptable purpose to practice. The second one was not to sink into lower states of mind. And the third one was to be a bodhisattva. The point I'm making is that the idea of permanent hell, it's pagan, and there is no permanent anything. Suzuki once said, hell is not punishment, it's training. And another thing is, our states of mind are not being pushed on us by an outside power. Karma is not an outside power. This is our own self-balancing. Oh, I want to make another writing comment. Here I have the phrase, Shunryu liked to tell a walking story. And that's a sort of phrase you can get into when you're telling a story or writing. But let's look at the accuracy of it. Did he like to tell this story? I don't know. He told this story. So I'm changing it to that. Shunryu told a walking story. He might have told it multiple times, but I don't know. Now, there are some stories that he did repeat. One he repeated a number of times was telling about how he would, when he shopped for vegetables, he would always want to buy the older ones or the ones that nobody else would buy. I do the same thing. And it did not come from him. It came from my German-American heritage. Not wasting. I had a very strong upbringing in not wasting. I'm rather compulsive about it. I really like dealing with recycling. I get so extreme, even though I know worldwide recycling is collapsed and not working. And I would take the tiniest scrap of paper and put it in the paper recycling. And I'm very frustrated here is that right now it seems you can't recycle glass. But the world has bigger problems than that. So that's all the comments I have about Chapter 2. Comments and tangents off tangents. Now there's a lot of tangents here at the beach when it's open. Tangents and 10 lassies. I would like to bring in Fred Harriman. Here are even more comments on the Japanese translation of Crooked Cucumber, the process of which has been helpful to me in clarifying some details. Now, I had trouble with them naming it Magata curry, a regular old cucumber, rather than Heibo curry, the useless runt cucumber, and expressed my thoughts in the third podcast with comments on the introduction to the book. I brought it up again in the fourth podcast in the comments part. And here we go again. Fred Harriman was the principal translator who helped me with working on Crooked Cucumber, like from 25 years ago, maybe to 22 years ago. We were in touch a lot, and he did a lot of work. We've reconnected through the years. His wife, Takio, did some research on the word Heibo. You know, we think that what Suzuki's master actually called him was Heibo curry. So it was more commonly used 100 years ago. There was a short story named Heibo curry, published by a newspaper cartoonist, Ippei Okamoto, in 1921, 6 years after Shunryu went to study with Sohon. Heibo curry, which Fred would translate as stunted cucumber. I'd say maybe runt cucumber. Fred wrote, when Heibo was a familiar word used in regular speech, it also applied to any other agricultural product that was simply not up to standard. It was also used to describe poor skills. For example, Heibo shogi refers to a poorly played Japanese chess match, and Heibo samurai would have meant a samurai without sufficient skills. So with Fred's help, I have come to feel that Magata curry was the right name for the Japanese translation. We had a little talk about that, and it's sort of weird because we still think that Heibo curry is what Suzuki's master Sohn called him, but sympathize with the translators who decided to name the book Magata curry. It's interesting the way the discussion on their choice of Magata curry has evolved, and it sort of went originally from both you and me feeling that was a mistake to coming around to thinking, no, that's right. So I wanted you to just say a few things for our dear pardon me, for our dear listeners on Cuk Audio about that.
The initial reaction for translating something is to try and find the most genuine, natural, and original word or phrase for it, or idiom, or whatever it is. And in this particular case, we are referring to a specific nickname, moniker, as you will, for Shunryu that Solon was talking about. And so one would think, well, then you should use that original. If that's what you're referring to, you should use those original words. So hebokyuri were the original words. However, Shunryu himself said to his American disciples, deshi, that he was referred to as crooked cucumber. So from that point on, you are really talking about what Shunryu said to you and to other disciples. Therefore, that becomes the original phrase, and the most accurate translation of that would not be hebokyuri, would not be what Solon said, but a translation of crooked cucumber, which is magata kyuri. Yeah.
Hoitsu didn't say absolutely it was hebokyuri. He said he thought it was hebokyuri. He said that he'd heard people use that term, and he really thought that was it anyway. But we can't be positive that was it. But the translation team, I think, thought that was it because they had discussions about whether to use it or not. And I think some of the things you pointed out was that maybe it's too obscure a term for the title. And the other thing is maybe I think maybe it was too embarrassing for them or too negative. And Magata Kyuri is a more positive, better title.
Right, but if Solon came up with a negative term for his deshi, I really think that most Japanese people would accept that and say, of course, he's hazing him, he's giving him something to think about. And so that doesn't seem to be too out of the ordinary that it would be hebokyuri. And the quotes that you gave me from Shunryu is kind of chuckling over it and saying that, well, the other good cucumbers left because they had somewhere to go and they were good at being a cucumber, whereas I wasn't, so I stayed.
Right.
And so that kind of does lead one to believe that it was stunted cucumber or hebokyuri. That was the original phrase. But it's just Shunryu thinking on his feet and coming up with something that he has to make a point, and in making that point he has to use his own linguistic resources. And he says, well, what am I going to say for hebokyuri? Well, crooked cucumber. And he came up with that. And that also seems to me to be one of the main points of his biography, is that he comes to America and he thinks on his feet and he gets his points across successfully.
I really appreciate your input. Actually, I feel they made the right decision also on not using the word etta now. Etta, to remind you, being the untouchables of Japan. Talking to you, it's just, it's too heavy. And they communicated the same thing in other ways.
It's distracting, and also there are advocacy groups in Japan that are extremely sensitive to it, and that it might just get them in a fight that they don't need to get into. In
convincing Samgat to do the book, see, I already knew them. I already had a relationship with them because they redid Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, and it was successful. And then they did Zen is Right Here, the book of vignettes about Suzuki that I did, and that did fairly well. Then when I was in Japan, they had me come to the office and wanted me to do a Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind too. And I said, I can't do that. That's Zen Center's business. And I said there already is one, not always so, and you all should just get the rights to it and translate it. And so they did that. At that time, I always said, hey, you ought to do Crooked Cucumber. And there have been fairly well-connected people in Japanese publishing who've urged them to do it for a long time. But the thing was, nobody wanted to hear what a foreigner had to say about Zen and that sort of thing. But finally, they went for it. And one of the arguments that I gave them for why they should do it came from you. And you said that someday Shunryu Suzuki would be recognized more in Japan because he did something that was very important to Japanese. He took something that was essentially Japanese to the West and was successful in planting it there.
That's what I think.
Yeah, you specifically pointed out the difference between that and the Suzuki violin method, which is also a famous a famous Suzuki who took something to the West and was successful, but he took something Western to the West and was successful. So thank you for that argument. I think that helped.
Yeah, I really think he deserves a lot of study and admiration, and I think that it's a good book for Japanese people who are venturing out of Japan and who are trying to make a point about something. They're trying to overcome a cultural gap like that, and I think it's full of lessons for them.
May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Well, that wraps it up for Cuke Audio Podcast for today. Thank you for joining us. Come back next Tuesday and we'll get together again. And if you want to help keep Cuke Audio going, just go to cuke.com, cuke.com, and there's a donate link near the top and on the bottom of the page. It's also linked to from the Podbean page. We'd love for you to become a subscriber via PayPal. How about $1 a month? There is a minimum, though. It's $0. And if that's all you can set aside for Cuke, just mail an empty envelope or blow us a kiss. We're somewhere out there in cyberspace. Take care of yourself. And don't let that nasty virus get near you or your loved ones. Till next week, I'm David Chadwick, the Poobah of Cuke Archives and Cuke Audio, with Doggett Bandita and Feline Cuchita, but without dearest lovely Katrinka, wishing you a grand awakening.